I love growing beans and peas. Green beans, lima beans, green peas, black-eyed peas. They're all good, and they're really becoming one of my favorite things to grow. So today I'm going to share with you 7 reasons why I love to grow beans and peas. Today I'm in my church's community garden because I want to show you my beautiful lima beans, and I want to tell you 7 reasons I love to grow beans and peas. These are Jackson Wonder Bush lima beans. They're a speckled lima bean that is super easy to grow. I knew I wasn't going to be spending a lot of time out here in the garden at this community garden, and so that's why I wanted something that was going to be easy to grow, something that was going to completely cover the bed and crowd out any weeds. These were perfect for that. I only had to pull a couple of stray weeds from this bed. The beans have totally taken over. Second, Jackson Wonder beans are a bush bean, which means they don't need any support. They can grow freestanding without a trellis, which makes them perfect for these raised beds. And since these raised beds are about 2 feet tall, it's going to make picking these beans super easy on my back. Just look how lovely these beans are. And notice how I have also interplanted with these beans some sunflowers, and that just makes it an interesting way to grow things. Not only do I have the beans, I have the flowers as well. The flowers help attract pollinators, and they just make the beds much prettier as well. Let's dig right in. Number 1, beans don't need fertilizer. Beans and peas are legumes, and legumes have a superpower in the plant community. Legumes make their own nitrogen. Legumes form a symbiotic relationship with nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil. They take nitrogen out of the air and work with good bacteria in the soil to convert the nitrogen into ammonia that can be used by the plant. That's why they're so green. I haven't put any fertilizer on these lima beans at all. How awesome is that? Not only does that mean that you don't need fertilizer, it also means that at the end of the season, you can work the spent crop into the soil and add it to your, or you can add it to your compost as a natural green fertilizer. In fact, many people, even farmers, grow some bean and pea varieties specifically as a cover crop to put nitrogen back into the soil. Number 2, there are both bush and vining varieties. Vining varieties like to climb, which can be great if you want to do some vertical gardening. Vining varieties will grow right up a pole or a trellis and can be both a space saver and also helps get the beans up higher and makes them easier to harvest. You can play with all different types of trellises and use the one you like the best. I have used both an arch trellis, which allows the beans to grow up over, and you can actually walk through a tunnel of beans and you can pick beans in the shade. This year I also did something called a TP trellis, where I grew my beans in hay bales in a circle and used poles in the shape of a teepee, and the beans climb right up it. And there again, you can just go right inside the teepee and you can pick the beans in the shade. Bush varieties, on the other hand, are freestanding, and that's what I'm growing here in my community garden. They're freestanding and they're bushy, and they generally don't need a trellis to support them. They can be useful depending on what you want in your garden and what kind of space you have available. For example, bush variety was perfect for these raised beds at my church garden because a vining variety wouldn't have been very good. It would have been more difficult. There's not enough space to really put good trellises in here. Plus, the beds are already 2 feet tall, and if you put a trellis on top of that, then I'm going to be reaching up too high in order to try to pick my beans. So pick the variety that works best for your situation. Having both bush varieties and vining varieties means that beans and peas are super versatile, and they can fit into almost any situation. Number 3, you really don't have to prune beans and peas. They're super low maintenance. You typically don't start beans and peas in a greenhouse. You don't have to start in a seed tray and do all that and then try to transplant them out. They don't work very well being transplanted, but they work really good if you simply sow seeds directly into your garden. I put these lima beans directly into these raised beds about 2 months ago, and look at them. They are wonderful. As with most plants, when you first put beans and peas into the soil, they'll need a little bit of TLC to help them get started. Mainly making sure they have plenty, the right amount of water until they get established, and helping them out by pulling out any weeds that are trying to compete with the small bean sprouts. After that, beans and peas pretty much just take care of themselves. This makes them a great variety to plant in a low maintenance garden, or maybe if you have a house that you just visit on the weekend, like a lake house, you could plant some beans at that lake house and you don't have to be there with them all week long to take care of them. Plant them, let them be, and then about 60 days later, whenever it's time for harvest, then you can tend to them then. Number 4, they can be interspersed with other plants. I like to grow beans and peas in between larger varieties of plants like tomatoes, peppers, watermelons. Bush beans grow well with other plants that get really tall. Climbing varieties with vines like to grow well with other plants that spread out on the ground, like watermelon, squash, and pumpkin. Since beans and peas don't take up a lot of space and they don't rob the soil of nitrogen that the other plants need, beans work really well with other plants. As a matter of fact, Native Americans used to grow beans with their squash and their corn. This was a method they called the 3 sisters. The bean vines would grow up the corn stalks like a trellis, while the squash vines would spread out on the ground and suppress weeds. So interplanting beans with other crops is something that people have been doing for thousands of years, and you can too. Number 5, beans and peas are staples that taste great and supply essential nutrition. In a survival situation, you could actually live almost exclusively off of beans and peas. 1 cup of lima bean, for instance, supplies 217 calories, 13% of your daily carbohydrate needs, and 30% of your protein needs, plus things like iron and magnesium and vitamin B6. Green beans have 27% of your vitamin C needs, and vitamin C helps support your immune system so you don't get sick. Beans and peas taste great and can be cooked in so many different ways: as a side dish, as the main course, as a soup, as a condiment like hummus. Even peanut butter comes from beans. Peanuts are a type of bean, not a nut. But you can even sprout your beans, which changes them more into a vegetable type of garden vegetable for a salad. Number 6, beans and peas are easy to store. Fresh produce has to be eaten before it goes bad, but beans are easy to store. The easiest way is to just put them in the freezer. Unlike most vegetables, freezing doesn't significantly change the flavor or texture of beans. It might change it some, but not much. Cucumbers or tomatoes will turn to mush if you try to freeze them. Beans and peas will pretty much be the same. And you can use frozen beans the same way you would have used fresh beans. Beans and peas also are really easy to dry. In fact, some beans will dry right on the vine. If the conditions are right, you just leave them on the plant, they will dry right there, and you can pick them as dry beans right off of the vine. Others can be picked and they can be air dried at room temperature, or you can speed up the process by drying them in a dehydrator. But once dried, most beans will last for decades if stored properly. Lastly, fresh, frozen, or dried beans can be pressure canned, and they will keep for 2 to 5 years or even longer. Canned beans make cooking super easy. All you have to do is open the can and warm the beans up on the stove for a few minutes. You could even cook the beans right in the can and eat them right out of the can if you had to. A lot of people ask though, but won't you get tired of beans if you're eating them all the time? Well, that's where the next reason that I love beans and peas comes in. You won't get tired of them because, number 7, there are so many different types of beans and peas. Think about all the different varieties. There's green beans, there's peanuts, there's lima beans, sugar snap peas, field peas, chickpeas, navy beans, black beans, English peas, black-eyed peas, pinto beans, and you can go on and on and on. There's so many different varieties, and each one has a different flavor and texture. Hey, beans are wonderful. You know the old fairy tale, Jack and the Beanstalk? Jack traded his old cow for some beans, some magic beans. Well, beans really are magic. Maybe Jack was onto something, because beans are amazing. Plant one single bean and you could get a pound of beans in return. Plant 100 beans and you'll have enough to survive the zombie apocalypse or feed your whole neighborhood. Plus, you can save some of the beans from this year and you can replant them next year, and you'll always have more beans. They're a totally self-sufficient type of crop, and they also give back to the soil, making it richer than it was before. I want to share with you a word from the scripture today. This comes from Psalm number 1. Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join with mockers. But they delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. They are like trees planted along the riverbank, bearing fruit each season. Their leaves neither wither, and they prosper in all they do. But not the wicked. They are like worthless chaff, scattered by the wind. They will be condemned at the time of judgment. Sinners have no place among the godly, for the Lord watches over the path of the godly, but the path of the wicked leads to destruction. Remember, be a godly person. Be a righteous person. Put your trust in God. Steer clear of the wicked, and don't be wicked yourself. God will take care of you, just like He has taken care of these beautiful lima beans in my church community garden. Thanks for joining me today, my friends. Remember, God loves you, and so do I.